Here's a fun fact. On September 30th, Secretary of Defense War Pete Hegseth and President Donald J. Trump dragged over 800 generals and admirals to Quantico for what essentially amounts to a pep rally. 800 generals in one room. That's not a strategy session, that's a bad sequel to Dr. Strangelove. So if it sounds like political theater, that's because it was. You'd think that 800 flag officers together would sound like thunder. Turns out, it was even louder than that. The official pitch, Secretary Hegseth and President Trump wanted to reset priorities and rally the troops. Remind the brass to be fit, tough, and loyal. Nothing to see here, just a motivational speech delivered to every 4-star in the phone book at once. And what did these officers get for their trouble? Well, it turns out that nothing says normal democracy like summoning 800 generals and admirals into a room so you can tell them to shave their beards and get in better shape. Apparently, the biggest threat to America isn't China or Russia or cyber warfare. It's scraggly facial hair and a slow mile time. And the room responded with the kind of energy you'd expect at a funeral for a mime. No booze, no applause, just silence. Totally normal. Happens all the time, right? Except it doesn't. Let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't about military readiness. It was about optics. About staging a Norman Rockwell painting where Trump is saluted by the brass like Caesar returning from Gaul. You don't summon every flag officer in America to Quantico unless you're staging something. This wasn't strategy, it wasn't a briefing, it was a loyalty test. Except instead of loyalty, what he got was a room full of people who looked like they were calculating early retirement benefits. Because here's the truth. They wanted the photo op, the propaganda reel, 800 uniforms in the theater while the boss rants about wars within and the dangers of scruffy grooming standards. Trump and Hegseth lined up the brass and basically said, smile for the camera, salute the dear leader, and while you're at it, get ready to use American cities as your new training grounds. Cities as training grounds. You can't make this stuff up, folks. This could have been an email. Hell, it could have been a PowerPoint slide with the words, clap for dear leader or else. But here's the kicker. Those 800 flag officers just sat there, stone-faced like statues in uniform. No applause, no standing ovation, not even a polite golf clap. Just silence so thick you could cut it with a bayonet, which in military terms is louder than a riot. Just think for a moment about the absurdity. A room full of 4-stars who command nuclear submarines and entire divisions being told that their biggest problem is facial hair, which I'm fairly certain upset more than a few of the female officers in the room. This is the equivalent of hauling NASA scientists into a room and lecturing them on how to change a light bulb. If you need to pack a room with every admiral and general in the service just to tell them you're in charge, you're not in charge. That's not leadership, that's insecurity with a microphone. You don't lecture 4-stars about beards unless your entire national security policy is just cosplay. The absurdity here isn't just the meaning, it's what the silence tells us. Silence is louder than applause when it comes from people who are trained to salute. That's not neutral, that's defiance with a dress uniform. And yet, the spin machine will still try to milk it as 800 generals support Trump. No, 800 generals were ordered to sit in a room and pretend this wasn't political theater with bad lighting. Here's the real danger. Politicizing the military is the last refuge of leaders who can't govern. When politicians treat soldiers as stage props and drag military into their culture wars, it's not about readiness, it's about control. In the U.S. military, we swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a man, not to a party, and sure as hell not to someone's fragile ego. And this is where we zoom out. This wasn't just about military optics. It was about how authoritarians use institutions as props. First it's the generals, tomorrow it's teachers, then judges, then small-town sheriffs, all lined up to give the illusion that power equals legitimacy. But in a free society, power doesn't earn legitimacy from uniforms or medals. It earns it from accountability. That means civilian oversight, checks and balances, and leaders who don't treat the chain of command like their personal LinkedIn endorsement list. Cities are for citizens, not for war games. Liberty doesn't require admirals and generals to clap on cue. Liberty requires them to stay loyal to the Constitution. They aren't there to clap for politicians. They're there to fight real wars, not culture wars. Liberty means a military that defends the nation, not polices American streets to score political points. Liberty means generals judged by competence, not applause volume. Liberty means civilian control that respects the difference between strategy and stunts. So let's rewind. What did we actually witness on September 30th? 800 flag officers summoned like extras in a movie. A president and a secretary of defense, war, trying to turn the Pentagon into a pep rally. Trump talks, head sex smiles. The cameras roll and the audience responds with a silence so deafening it could have been used in a Navy SEAL psyop. That is military discipline, folks. The silence you heard, that silence wasn't disrespect. It was 800 generals refusing to play along resistance. Here's the punchline. You could call this meeting historic, but in history books, they won't file it under strategy. They'll file it under political theater. A whole room of 20 and 30-year professionals saying without words, we serve the Constitution, not the circus. And honestly, that silence was the loudest applause for American democracy you'll hear all year. At the end of the day, this meeting wasn't about the generals, it was about us. Whether we're still awake enough to recognize political theater when it's paraded in front of us like a circus act with taxpayer funding. So here's my question. When politicians drag the military on stage to prop up their egos, who's really under command? The generals or the audience being played for suckers? When the applause dies, do you notice the silence or do you let the spin tell you what it meant? Drop your take in the comments. And hey, if you think clapping for Caesar should stay in the history books, go ahead and share this because silence only works in a theater full of 4 stars. Out here, we've got to make some noise.